How do you deal with a huge haul when it's all perishable? Hi, it's Hope from Under the Median, where every week on this channel we talk about practical frugality. I was in the kitchen, guys, beginning the process of processing this huge produce haul. And I thought it would be a really great idea to come on and share with you all the exact steps that I take to deal with a lot of produce and actually use it or preserve it before it goes bad. Because I think that's what happens is people, when they find produce at a great price, they're a little afraid to buy a whole lot of it because they're afraid it's all going to go bad and they're going to wind up throwing half of it out. Now, clearly it is the end of the growing season and I have a lot of produce here on the kitchen table. Some of this produce is from our CSA, Community Supported Agriculture membership box. I do a little bit of side work helping that farmer with his social media, so he pays me in produce every week. That's where part of this came from. And part of it was a fantastic deal that I found at my local Kroger this week. Let me show you real quick what those were. I got these bags of carrots. These are organic 2-pound bags of carrots, and they were marked down to $1.35 each. So I grabbed, I think I grabbed 6 of them. That would be 12 pounds of carrots. And then the same thing with these onions. These were 2-pound bags of organic onions, and these were marked down to $1.93 for each bag. So I grabbed 10 pounds of those. So that's what kind of the synopsis is of what we have sitting on the kitchen table. First step that you want to do is make sure that you have a complete list of everything that you're working with. I generally just use the perishable food inventory. Every Thursday, I fill out a perishable food inventory, and that helps us to use up items that are already sitting on the counter and in the refrigerator that have a definite shelf life. And then I can generally menu plan using those items for another 2 to 3 days. Even when I think, oh my gosh, we're running out of food, I have to go to the grocery store. Generally, you really don't. So I just usually grab that form when I'm doing something that is like a huge amount of food that I'm trying to deal with and figure out how I'm going to use it or preserve it. Now, as always, whenever you make a list, it should be what, guys? It should be prioritized. So that perishable food list, you're going to make sure that the items which will go bad first, the items with the shortest shelf life, are at the top of that list. Because if you can't get this all done in 1 or even 2 days, you want to make sure that you're not doing your winter squash first and then you're doing the zucchini last. It should be opposite, right? So your zucchini has a shorter shelf life than that winter squash. So you want to make sure you're doing the zucchini first and then working your way down to the items that are going to last much longer. Speaking of zucchini, so these are the items that are on the table that I'm going to deal with first. This is zucchini, and then over here we have all this lovely array of peppers. These are definitely the items that are sitting on the table that have the shortest shelf life. But you want to make sure that you have a complete list of them, and they're once again listed in order from the shortest shelf life to the longest shelf life. So what do you do after you have your list? The first thing that I do is determine how much of this food is my family realistically going to get through without having to change it in some form and either freeze it or dehydrate or do something else to preserve it for later use. That amount of food I take off of the table. So I know what I am left with and what I'm looking at is what I really, really have to deal with. Hey guys, if you're finding this helpful, can you do me a super big favor? Can you scroll up and hit that thumbs up button for me? That lets YouTube know you're finding this helpful and you'd like to see more of this content. And if you're not subscribed to Under the Median, go ahead, subscribe and hit the bell notification button. When you set items aside, knowing that you're going to use them up right away, make sure that you are storing them in such a way that it will lengthen the shelf life. Let me give you an example. These peppers, even though I have them sitting on the table, will actually store better in the refrigerator. But here's the thing with peppers. You'll notice that it has farm dirt on it. Leave that on it. Just set it in the refrigerator. Wash it before you eat it. Anytime you have a pepper, if you wash it, make sure that you dry it completely before you put it in the refrigerator. The water does not deal very well with it in the refrigerator. Some of these items, like the potatoes and the onions, do really, really well if you put them into an environment that is what we like to call cellar-ish, all right? So you remember you had the old-fashioned food cellar at your grandma's house? That's what you are sort of thinking about when you store potatoes. So root cellar-like conditions, it's very cool, it's not damp, it's got to be dry, and it needs to be dark-ish. One great thing that you can do with potatoes, when we lived at our old house, we had an enclosed 3-season porch that was attached to the house. It was perfect for things like potatoes. Put them in a cardboard box, put newspaper around them, put newspaper just lightly over the top of the box, put it on that 3-season porch. And those potatoes will keep for a month, 2 months, sitting on that 3-season porch. Really, potatoes like it somewhere in, I'm going to say 50 to 55 degrees is absolutely perfect for things like potatoes and onions and even carrots. Once I have figured out what we're going to use right away, I have put all of that produce away in such a method that it's going to extend the shelf life as long as possible. Then I'm going to start thinking about preserving the produce that is left on the table. There are a number of methods that you can use to preserve produce. Clearly, canning. I have a hot water canner. It's not my favorite methodology, however, of preserving things. I really prefer to freeze or dehydrate items. When you're getting ready to freeze an item, you need to know whether that item needs to be blanched or not blanched. Blanching means that you're going to put that item, cut it up, put it in hot water, in boiling water for a short length of time. After you have put it into the boiling water for the prescribed length of time, you're going to immediately plunge it into an ice water bath to stop the cooking process. What that does is it helps the enzymes which normally are in that food that will continue to ripen that food. It will stop that ripening process, and it will also set the color so that if you have deep green vegetables like these green beans, when you blanch them before you freeze them, it will help them to maintain that deep green color after they are frozen and then cooked again after they are thawed. It also helps the vegetables to maintain their texture. Some vegetables, if you don't blanch them before you freeze them, it means that the texture is going to come out kind of weirdish. Maybe I don't know, kind of mushy. I don't know how else to describe it if you have not blanched it before you have frozen it. So think in terms of blanching before you freeze. The other thing you need to think about is whether you can do what I call flash freezing. All right, so this is a cooking term I'm using, not like a technical term in an environment where you have like an industrial type flash freezing process. This is where you cut up things like these onions in much smaller pieces, and then you put them flat on a baking tray, on a large baking tray, which I have lined with a Silipat liner so that it doesn't stick to the tray. The pieces won't stick if they're on that Silipat. You're gonna freeze them flat until they're firm. Then they will peel right off of that Silipat liner, and you can put them into freezer bags. Make sure anytime that you are freezing something, they look remarkably alike after a few months in the freezer. Most items do. Make sure that you label it and you date it before you put it in the freezer. Dehydrating is the next method of preserving food. I use my dehydrator a lot. I have 2 of them and I use them all of the time. Now you can also just use your oven as a dehydrator. Sometimes you have to make sure that you get the right ventilation into the oven. Your oven needs to go down to warm mode, which will be under 200 degrees or under. If your oven will do that, you can dehydrate using your oven. Sometimes you have to put a little fan in front of the oven on low speed in order to keep the right amount of ventilation going in the oven to help things dehydrate, but an oven can effectively be used for dehydrating purposes. If you're unfamiliar with dehydrating, I did a step-by-step dehydrating guide, and that is on the website. I'm gonna make sure that I leave a link to that post on the website in the description of this video. The next thing you might want to consider is pickling. I have made homemade pickles before. It's actually really easy to do, but does anybody else save their pickle juice like I do when you're done with commercially made pickles? You can cut up some of these onions, and if you have cucumbers or even that summer squash, that zucchini, you can cut it in slices and stick it into that pickle brine and leave it in there for a week or so, and it will taste just like pickles, and it will last, probably not as long as the commercially made pickles. As you're preserving food, here's the next bit of advice that I would give you. Use your kitchen helpers. Now, I'm not necessarily referring to your partner, spouse, or your children, but they could indeed be considered kitchen helpers. I'm talking about things like slicing machines, things like food processors. Those are your kitchen helpers, and I would definitely get those out and use them to help make the process of preserving the food go more quickly and smoothly. One of the things you need to think about before you begin freezing or dehydrating or pickling or doing anything else with the food is, how am I going to use it? Now, I don't go to all the time, trouble, and effort to actually put together a list of recipes that I think I'm going to use 10 pounds of carrots in. I don't do that. But what I do is consider the different ways that I generally use carrots and what form I need the carrots to be in to most easily use them. Do you need that vegetable or fruit to be shredded? Do you need it to be sliced? Do you need it to be cubed? If you use all three of those, and let's say that I am putting up 8 pounds of carrots, I would probably choose a certain percentage of those carrots to be preserved or frozen in all 3 or 4 of those different forms, so that I know throughout the winter they're available. Part of your prep is already done. It makes it so easy to go in, grab something from the freezer, and know that it's in the exact form that you're going to need it to use in the recipes that you generally make. One of the forms you need to think about that might not readily come to mind is pureeing. Things like this hard winter squash. A lot of times I will, let me just grab this here so you can see it. Let's see if I can do this without knocking anything. Yes, I did it without knocking anything off the kitchen table. That was really good. I didn't know if I could or not. Butternut squash. Butternut squash, I usually cut it right here across the neck, and I will roast this and then take the seeds out and roast this bulbous part separately. The bulbous part is much thinner when you roast it, so it is super easy to go ahead and puree using your food processor and then freeze it flat in freezer bags. This will maintain its consistency a little bit more, and then I can just cube this whole upper part of the butternut squash and put that into the freezer in the form of cubes. Think about pureeing things, because especially when it comes to winter squash, I will puree pounds and pounds and pounds of that winter squash before we get to probably mid-November, guys. And it makes it so easy in the middle of winter to grab some of that pureed squash, and in about 20 or 30 minutes, I can have amazing squash soup ready for supper. Make sure that you put it in the proper containers. Make sure it's very well sealed before you store it for long-term storage. Make sure that you label and date everything. If you need more ideas for using food before it rots, our family has a written goal to waste no more than 3% of all the food that comes into this house. If you want some ideas on how we make that happen, there's a video, it's right over there. Go take a look.